So this is coming up to 20:30 hours GMT, 8:30 p.m. in London on Tuesday, the 25th of May 2021. Now, these are the main tabloids of Fleet Street today. So we shall be talking more about these and also the absences of the issues that they should be featuring. Now, this is the one about the item about Boris Johnson paying for his wedding has been featured in the online news items during the day. This is the end of the day. So these papers didn't really get that one, but the fact that Johnson is being reportedly prepared to pay for the cost of his wedding and that it is in the news shows the level, the extent of bankruptcy and immorality that dominates this country. And there is a news item a few hours old and issued by the Reuters news agency in the last 5 hours to the fact that an inquiry we shall be kind of putting within quotation marks because we really don't have any confidence based on the evidence that inquiries are really truthful. But this one is just for the record as reference that an inquiry has found, according to Reuters news agency, that the Conservative Party in Britain, being fronted by Boris Johnson, is riddled with anti-Islamic tendencies and propensities. That doesn't need an inquiry. That is fact. And there are quite a few preparatory pieces. And this is the legacy of the Canadian racist criminal Beaverbrook. And Beaverbrook's legacy of racist criminality and anti-democratic behavior and propaganda, the Daily Express and the Sunday Express. And there is a double promotion on the front page of the pictures of this is Beyond Criminality. This is imposed as the Home Secretary, and she's being given the script, my firm but fair plan to protect our borders. Yuck. She has no basis for saying any of that, but that is not her. She is a machine, she is a stooge. So that's her, Priti Patel. And there is a picture of Kate Middleton. And the caption says, Kate wears it well in colour of Scottish flag. In colour of Scottish flag, meaning that she is part of the propaganda weapons deployed to repair the damage that Boris Johnson has done to the so-called United Kingdom. And it's all fake news, stuffed fake news inside. And there are about 200 pictures on 2 pages of Kate Middleton. And on page 2, there is further promotion for the ugly racist stooge Priti Patel. There's a picture of the people in the water trying to reach England shores. And it says this is by Sam Lister, Deputy Political Editor. Digital borders will fix broken migrant system, says Patel. Now, this is the issue that actually deserves to be mentioned and examined and diagnosed by referring to the literally thousands of statutes, thousands of declarations, agreements, international declarations, international agreements, international treaties that the UK is signed to. And all of those conventions, treaties, declarations are about upholding the rights of people like the migrants, like the asylum seekers. And if the British press, so-called the Fleet Street, were to be treated as being representative of a regime, of a government, of a state, of a society that has any respect for any of the international treaties, then the day's papers, and especially in stories about Priti Patel threatening the human rights and the rights of the people seeking asylum and shelter and refuge, would have, contextually at least, if not fully, but contextually, there would have been references to the obligations that every state, member state, signatory state is under. But there is no mention of that in the coverage today, and there is hardly any mention ever. And this is the kind of reality. Today is the 25th of May, 2021, and they're referring on the various platforms to the anniversary today of the murder by the police knee of a Black American man, George Floyd. And this is the anniversary they are referring to. There is a piece by somebody who has posted an item on Facebook that says that since George Floyd was murdered, a number of other black men have been murdered by the police, and 1,000 others have died as a result of police violence. Now, this is a very serious issue. Where do you go? I mean, there is a series of tweets that have been expressing thanks to David Lammy. Lammy is the member of parliament from Tottenham in the Haringey Borough in North London, same constituency where Barney Grant was MP for, and the same constituency where the policeman was killed at the Broadwater Farm riots in October 1985. Now, I was not originally intending to be there, but I happened to be there as a kind of result of an unplanned journey that I took. And I was in a car driven by another person, and the car stopped underneath the building called the Broadwater Farm. Now, when that happened, it was literally minutes before the actual violence occurred. Now, where the people were hiding or where they assembled, we didn't see. But shortly after, minutes after, the car left we could see from a location where the car was parked for another reason, nothing connected with the event at all, but somebody went in somebody else's house to pick up something or have a conversation or something. I cannot describe because I wasn't inside, I was sitting in the car. And within a mile or so of where I was sitting in the car, fire could be seen. And that is something that we later learned was the place where the car I was in had parked and stopped. We didn't see anyone. So it was very strange and very eerie later to learn what happened there. So whoever organized the rally or rallies that resulted in the violence that included the death of a policeman, the member of parliament at the time for that particular area was Barney Grant. He wasn't MP at the time, but he became MP 2 years later when he got in the general election that took place in 1987. And we are talking about 1985, October 1985, when the Broadwater Farm riot, so-called, took place. Now, after Barney Grant died, there was a big tussle within the Labour Party as to who should become the MP for that constituency. Eventually, it was decided to allow this David Lammy to become the MP. Now today, 25th of May 2021, there have been quite a few tweets. The ones that I recognize are all white people, white women in fact. One is Sharon Hodgkinson and the other is Margaret Hodge. Now these women have paid tribute to David Lammy for doing the video about the murder of George Floyd in the USA. What I have to say is that judging by the contents of the statements and assertions that David Lammy has made over the last, let's say, 10 years, Lammy has, of course, changed course and he has become increasingly less hesitant about opposing racism, criticizing racism. But Lammy is nowhere near being assertive about fighting racism in this country. I believe in fighting racism constitutionally, democratically, peacefully. And that requires the actual existence and availability of the ideological clarity for basing the constitutional and ethical and legal campaign against racism. Lammy doesn't believe, well, at least not on the basis of what he has published so far, that racism should be ended. And Lammy is at his highest, if you like, in terms of appropriateness and determination. Lammy is capitulating. Lammy is not assertive independently, internationally, objectively, and ethically and morally. And to say that is very significant because Lammy currently is the only member of parliament in the Labour Party or any party to be making any significant kind of appearances online about racism. Why? Because today, 25th of May 2021, there has been a Reuters news agency report saying that Boris Johnson Well, the Conservative Party has a serious problem about anti-Muslim hatred and discrimination now. They don't say anti-Muslim, they say Islamophobic. Now, Islamophobic is a complicated linguistic abuse of the actual facts. When somebody says that they are against Islamophobia, that person is saying that they are against hatred against Muslims. But Islamophobia itself, as a word conjunction, but it is a word that is anti-Muslim. So what these people are saying, that they are against Islamophobia, they are saying that Islam itself is something to be feared, to be afraid of. Phobia is fear, and Islam is the name. So if you put together Islam and phobia, it makes it something that should be translated into ordinary English as something to be afraid of. So those who are saying that they are against anti-Muslim hatred are saying that Islam is something to be afraid of. So they are contradicting themselves. And this is something that I have been pointing out to those who I have noticed using this online. And one of those that I have been pointing this out to has been a man who has been behind this Byline Times. Now, the Byline Times has itself today published a video mocking Andrew Neil and his soon to be launched GB news outlet, which is a right wing, racist, anti Muslim, reactionary, conservative, far right, Fox News type propaganda weapon that is going to attack the BBC and support racist and anti-Muslim elements. And there is nothing in the coverage, in the promotional coverage of the GB News, including promotion by the UK Press Gazette, that suggests that this is a threat to real freedom and real kind of equality. Now, today is also the day when two other things to do with racism have happened. One is that a public figure who had tweeted that the Israeli attacks on the Palestinians was like a genocide. Now, he has been in the news throughout the day today, connected with the reports that he has withdrawn or apologized for his remark that the Israeli attacks on Gaza and the Palestinians was like the Nazi, was like a genocidal attack. And he has reportedly said in his withdrawal of that remark that this is not time for hyperbole. So what he's saying, in effect, is that if a genocidal attack takes place, or if a massacre takes place, or if massacres take place, then people observing those events should be prepared to find a way to justify the massacres. That's what he's saying. Because hyperbole means that a language is being used to exaggerate the impact and the implication and the fact of the events going on, no matter how barbaric and how criminal and how violent the attacks are. So he's saying that even if there are massacres, people should find words that do not call the massacres massacres or the genocides genocide. Now, this is happening, this news item is happening on the very day the entirety of the Western powers, including the EU, have declared war on Belarusia. The Belarusia yesterday, or in the last, let's say 48 hours, hijacked a Ryanair aeroplane in order to kidnap one passenger in that particular flight. And the passenger is a journalist. And all the Western countries have not lost any time, wasted any time before declaring propaganda and economic sanctions against Belarusia. Now, the man who says that we should not be using hyperbole, if he were given the charge, then there would be no action against Belarusia, no recognition of the kidnap of the dissident journalist, no hijack of the plane that was carrying him. Hyperbole would not be appropriate because he would then deny all of it is happening. But that's not happening. It is all happening, and the entirety of the Western might has been mobilized in propaganda and economic sanction terms to punish Belarusia just for one individual journalist being hijacked. Now, compared to that, how many similar individuals have been murdered in Gaza, in the rest of Palestine, by the attacking Israeli forces over the last 4 weeks? Now, if one person being hijacked and kidnapped justifies the entirety of the Western powers declaring economic and propaganda war against Belarusia, then multiply that. Multiply the numbers of people that have been affected, murdered, hijacked, imprisoned by Israeli action against the Palestinians. And you can find 1,000-fold perpetration of violence and attacks and violations of human rights of the Palestinians, of the people of Gaza, and others like the Al Jazeera journalists based in Gaza, which was targeted for bombing by the Israelis. And today, in his statement, David Lammy hasn't got anything to say about that. That is to say, about the hijack of the Ryanair plane by the Belarusians to kidnap the journalist flying in that flight. So David Lammy's video would not have been praised by Margaret Hodge and Sharon Hodgkinson, to mention only two, but there have been others, had either Hodge or Hodgkinson noticed in the contents of David Lammy's video anything that really challenges racism in Britain. Not really. And that is why they have noted with positive comments his tweet. So where do we go? This is the extent, the depth of the racist, anti-racist, if you like, or racist anti-racism, and the anti-Muslims solidarity with the Muslims, whom they call members of the religion that is to be feared, Islamophobia. And there is nothing that I have noticed so far, and this is coming to 9 o'clock in the evening, local time, that is 21 hours GMT. Nothing from any of the members of parliament, including the very small number that are noticed normally to be posting things about in solidarity with the Palestinians. Even they haven't said anything about the man withdrawing the remark about genocide, nor about the comparison between the Belarusian kidnap of the journalist with the Israeli bombardment of the Palestinian targets. And today's news has been updated online with the revelation that Netanyahu has threatened very serious violence against Gaza and Palestinians if he finds that they have broken the truce, which currently is the frame being referred to. And so therefore there is nothing in the rest of the papers, rest of the pages about any of that. Now the papers instead focus quite a lot of attention to Dominic Cummings. And by focusing attention to Dominic Cummings, they are reaffirming their servitude and the loyalty to the cabal fronted by Boris Johnson. They are loyal to Boris Johnson's cabal and regime. And this is the headline on the I newspaper, which is supposed to be not necessarily a conservative outlet, but it has become conservative through and through. It is saying that tomorrow, in his scheduled appearance before a select committee of the members of parliament or a select committee of members of parliament, Dominic Cummings is going to wreak revenge against Boris Johnson. Now, I predict that that will be not what he will be doing. There won't be any revenge. And I'll come to that in a second. And this is the line that the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Star, the Sun, the Boris Graph, that is the Telegraph, they're all running this line for Boris Johnson as against the supposed onslaught, revenge that Dominic Cummings is planning to unleash against Johnson tomorrow during his evidence before the committee of MPs. He's scheduled to appear before. I keep saying scheduled to because things may not happen as they're scheduled. That is to say, Dominic Cummings may be diverted from appearing, some kind of accident may be staged somewhere in order to undo the planned appearance by Dominic Cummings before the particular committee of the MPs. So given all those scenarios, I'm reading this propaganda that would suit Downing Street, that is the regime of Boris Johnson or regime of the Conservatives fronted by Boris Johnson. Now Downing Street is braced meaning very concerned about something happening. So they are braced meaning they are ready to face something untoward, something unpleasant, something detrimental to them, harmful to them. That is what braced means. So Downing Street is braced for new claims about Boris Johnson's handling of pandemic. Now, the fact is that Boris Johnson didn't handle anything. Boris Johnson was himself handled by other people. Everything about Boris Johnson since he kind of replaced Theresa May, and everything about Boris Johnson during the 4 years after he replaced Kenneth Livingstone, Lying Still Livingstone, from May 2008 until May 2016 as being incumbent in the corrupt post of mayor at the expense of London. Everything about Boris Johnson being able and having the capacity, given the insight, etc., shows that he is absolutely unfit for purpose. Everything is being recorded, and every time Johnson does something, he does it reluctantly. For example, when he was desperate to go to India to meet Narendra Modi in April 2021, Johnson was absolutely blazing with the help of the corrupt Fleet Street media that he was going there. At the last minute, Johnson had to be almost like, but not necessarily really, physically stopped from going to see Narendra Modi face to face. Now, it was happening at the time when Modi had already unleashed severe surges across India of the Indian variant of the COVID-19 virus. And Boris Johnson would have returned with a resurgent virus. But he was kind of reluctantly dissuaded, if you like, from going to see Modi. But regardless of that, 20,000 Indians were allowed to enter the UK in the period that is covered by the concerns that Indian variant was arriving in Britain, and it was dangerous, and it had already caused mayhem across India already. So whatever the papers are saying today about Boris Johnson being braced for new revelations about his handling of pandemic, these things are absolute packs of lies. And what this country is going through with Boris Johnson at the front of the cabal at the so-called address as the HQ of the government is unreal. Nothing is what it appears to be. Johnson is unreliable. It's not my opinion. It's a fact every day in the papers, in the magazines. Reluctantly, they are publishing, having to publish. It's not like they enjoy telling the truth about the liar Boris Johnson. But they have no option because they themselves would lose the shreds of fragile credibility that they might just be clinging on to. Fleet Street is a joke. And every single paper is a joke. We shall come to the details of this today's jokes. And Priti Patel, who has been unreality herself, because as the incumbent in the post of the Home Secretary, Priti Patel is in a position to address the UK government's policy and responsibility about asylum, migration, or whatever. But every day she has to find something that is covered in hyperbolic terms by the papers. Hyperbole, we shall come to the hyperbole there, about the denial of genocide as the language used by the man who has now been forced to withdraw that tweet and condemn his own, what he calls hyperbole, that he has just withdrawn. Now, Priti Patel has to find hyperbolic kind of headlines every day to paint her as being engaged in a crusade. Remember the crusade, the qualification about using the term crusade. But her crusade is a kind of imitation. It's a simulation of the Christians' anti-Muslim crusade of thousands of years, or the 1,000-year-old, thousands, 1,200 years old, 1,400 years old. And she finds in the slightest kind of incident of migrants being even alive, she thinks that that is evidence of a threat. No migrant should be alive. That seems to be her kind of preferred objective, that migrants should be alive, that asylum seekers should not be alive. That's what she over focuses on. If there is a report of even 5 migrants trying to cross the channel into England, then Priti Patel thinks that that is enough provocation aimed at the very existence of England, which then justifies her calling on the British Air Force and the Navy to attack these 5 migrants adrift in a unreliable, unsafe dinghy amid the English and the French Channel, or this channel between France and England, let's say neutrally. Now, what do you call that kind of mentality? When the daughter of parents who fled East Africa because they were not Africans and they took refuge in England, behaves in that way against migrants and refugees and refuge seekers, what kind of words do you find to condemn the inhumanity and the cruelty and the barbarity and the backwardness and the lack of compassion and lack of civilization in the behavior of that person? What language do you find? No hyperbole would be enough to condemn this behavior, this attitude, this outlook by Priti Patel. And there is nothing, there is absolutely nothing that the so-called official opposition in the UK House of Parliament, Houses of Parliament, and the House of Commons, as fronted by Keir Starmer. There is no sign that he even knows that Patel is destabilizing the basic environment by poisoning it to the extent that she is doing, and spreading hatred, and spreading malice, and spreading lies against the victims of asylum. Because what the victims of asylum means is that the people who are seeking asylum, the people who are seeking refuge, are people escaping persecution, escaping hunger, and escaping genocidal attacks that Gaza has been subjected to, Jerusalem has been subjected to, and the remaining bits of Palestine have been and are being subjected to. What language can be used? There is no presence of the Conservative Party's critics, supposed critics. There is no Keir Starmer, and there is no opposition statement issued from the side of the so-called official opposition in the House or Houses of Parliament. Now, the piece about Max Mosley, we have discussed Max Mosley in the previous part A, and we said that we shall continue more about his role in now the Daily Mail, claiming to be running this one as the special report. The splash is pandemic predators £52 billion raid on UK farms. Now that's the flash. And what this means is that the pandemic continues to be used as a cover, as a pretext for robbery of society, of the public resources by big business crooks and criminals, all of whom are behaving in the way that David Cameron and Lex Greensill and Gupta have been accused of behaving. So British farms worth £36 billion have been sold off to private equity in high-risk pandemic plundering spree. That is the language of the Daily Mail. Matt Oliver, city correspondent. The Daily Mail can reveal that 123 UK companies have been bought up by the predators since the outbreak of coronavirus, with 19 more deals worth nearly 16.6 billion in the pipeline. It means that the value of private equity takeovers since the start of last year is set to hit a staggering £52.6 billion. Data firm Deal Logic says the number of firms swallowed up in the private equity deals last year is the highest since the financial crisis 13 years ago. Now, that is a completely meaningless comparison. Nobody notices the comparisons, ordinary people, many. It is only in their kind of poisonous, closed circuit kind of world that these kind of comparisons make any real sense. Household names to succumb range from Asda to the AA and even the owner of Butlins. The Mail today sets out the scale of the assault on British business and examines the risks it poses for jobs. And there is a piece on page 2 of the Daily Mail which says, PPE boss slams BIP lane for contracts amid cronyism. Cronyism is another word for corruption and criminality. And there is another headline on the same page 2. Now ministers warn, don't leave Indian strain hotspots like Bolton. Britons have been warned against travel to or from parts of the country where the Indian variant of COVID is spreading. Now, let's pause there. In the same day, they're talking against restrictions. And we shall talk about that in a minute. Before we go on to talk about Max Mosley. And they've got a 2-page spread, pages 4 and 5, about that front page story about pandemic predators, 52 billion raid on UK farms. That is the 2-page spread that includes the gobbling up and swallowing of G4 security farm, etc., and Asda. And it says vast profits, huge debts, but few rules, sums it up. The robbery is taking place with effectively virtual impunity given to the big crooks that are looting the country. And there is no rule, which takes us back to our assertion on the evidence that there is no legal system in this country. The courts are a bunch of corruptocracies. They don't actually hold the big business crooks to account. They don't deliver justice to the many. They don't deliver access to the many. And this is indirectly admitted by the Daily Mail, and there are 10 deals to make your blood boil. This is the continuation of that pandemic predators. There's 5 pages already. So they're saying that it is worth making your blood boil. And then there is the next. And then they've got a page 10 and 11 spread. Well, it goes on to page 75, but let's look at the main spread. This is one against Max Mosley. So fascist son who tried to destroy free press that exposed him. Now that's untruthful because Daily Mail itself is guilty of fascism and supporting the Nazis. So it cannot expect to be excused when it accuses Oswald Mosley's son as fascist and hides its own fascist road. Now then it says that Max Mosley rebelled in the glamour of Formula One. But Max Mosley, who's died at 81, had an ugly racist past and an exotic private life that sparked a bitter vendetta against Fleet Street. Now, Fleet Street is what we diagnose daily, world exclusive diagnosis. And we call it the street of lies and liars. So Max Mosley was not anywhere near as extensive and as thorough as we are and have been against the liars of Fleet Street. And they are gleefully saying that there are 3 inquiries going on over Martin Bashir's scandal. The story reveals he tore up his license fee over rotten BBC. And ex-Panorama host Jeremy Vine is being reported as backing a criminal investigation into Panorama. Now he's pictured with his wife, Rachel Scofield, who is a BBC News Channel presenter, has been. And here is that piece that we talked about in comparison with the man who has retracted his accusation against the Israelis of mounting or carrying out a genocidal attack on Gaza and the Palestinians. This is the contrast, because this one is about Belarusia hijacking the plane to kidnap this journalist. Now, this is something that is absolutely sick-makingly ironic. Remember the phrase, taking back control? That was the main slogan that the liar Boris Johnson peddled, and the slogan that the criminal, liar, racist, nasty Nigel Farage echoed and backed. Now this says, unless the European Union takes on Putin and his poodle, none of us will be safe on a plane again. What do they mean? They wanted the European Union to be smashed. And they supported Putin because Putin supported Brexit. Putin supported Brexit and Putin wanted the European Union to be destroyed. What are they saying, the Daily Mail? It is the main in-house propaganda paper for Brexit and against the European Union. So we go back to these items again. And the item on the pages 10 and 11 about Max Mosley. This has got that picture in the News of the World, or News of the Screws as the private calls it. With the front page, splash, Formula One boss has sick Nazi orgy with hookers. And there is a picture of Max Mosley sitting with Hugh Grant and the actor Steve Coogan. And these are the pictures that the Daily Mail is running. These are the two women standing on either side of Max Mosley. And they're called hookers. That is prostitutes by the Daily Mail, and as was said by the News of the World. And they're recalling that at Oxford University, Max Mosley backed apartheid in South Africa. And then they're saying, this is really hilarious. Then they're saying that he was racist, and they're quoting him as saying, things have gone too far with multiracialism. And then they're saying that he sat at the top table of a neo-Nazi event. Now, why are they doing that? Because Mosley actually talked about privacy law and the invasion of privacy by the Fleet Street Papers. And he was able to win the libel case against the news of this cruise based on that item that the Daily Mail is running again, or pictures of which the Daily Mail is running again. And there is a quotation that sums up the problem with the English law. It says, in a 2015 interview with former New Labour spin doctor Alistair Campbell, Max Mosley said, "If I want to be friends with the Prime Minister and I give £1 million, I will get access and invitations. It may be wrong, but it is not illegal." That is absolutely the case. Well, Max Mosley was either called to the bar in the early 1960s or he became a barrister during the 1960s, let's say. So he's a licensed law trader, so he's familiar with the licensed law trade and some of the rudimentary concepts about law and morality. Now, what he's doing there in that statement, as attributed to an interview that Alistair Campbell ran with Mosley, Mosley is actually contrasting morality or immorality and illegality. And by saying that giving money to the Prime Minister or making a political donation and getting access in return may be wrong, but that is not necessarily illegal, which is where the illegality and the corruption at the heart of the British legal system is to be found. And in the decades since the Nazis were, let's say, confronted by the British as part of the British defense against the Nazi takeover, there should have been due and overdue kind of reform and kind of rewriting of the Constitution or the constitutional aspects of the criminal law that affects the behavior of the wrongdoers with loads of money that can buy access, undue access, immoral access, wrongful access to the occupant of the highest office in the land. But there hasn't been. Why? Because the occupants in the highest position, office in the land, don't want wrongdoing to be stopped. If to stop the wrongdoings would be to stop huge sums of money coming in from the wrongdoers. Have I summed it up? And that is where I say is the evidence of the Labour Party being dead. Because when Barney Ecclestone and Tony Blair were exposed over a £1 million donation that Barney Ecclestone had made to the Labour Party, and the link that existed between that £1 million donation and the particular exemption given to motor racing and Formula One over taxes and liabilities. Both Tony Blair, as the Prime Minister at the time, and Barney Ecclestone, who succeeded Max Mosley by that time as the boss of Formula One, both Ecclestone and Blair denied any link between the money and the particular watering down of the law. So although Keir Starmer, I have been calling him the political murderer of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer has indeed been the political martyr of the Labour Party, but the Labour Party has been put on the deathbed by Tony Blair when it comes to morality, when it comes to ethics and accountability. And despite his bombastic kind of appearances on certain issues, Gordon Brown is as corrupt as Tony Blair, has always been. In fact, Gordon Brown has been more crafty than Blair himself, because Gordon Brown supported the war on Iraq by Tony Blair, the war on the Muslims by Tony Blair. But somehow, the liar Gordon Brown managed to avoid being mentioned as being guilty and as being colluding and as being party to these corrupt, illegal, racist, anti-Muslim antics and behavior and policies and preferences by Tony Blair. So today's news by the Reuters news agency, today's, that is 25th of May, 2021, that a probe, that is an investigation, has found that the Conservative Party is too riddled with anti-Islamic behavior, anti-Islamic antics, anti-Islamic prejudice, bias, and so on. Now that is, on its own, not acceptable, because it's not true. If the Conservatives are riddled with anti-Muslim bias, then so is the Labour Party. So is the Lib Dems. So is the Green Party. So is the Communist Party, or whatever it is called these days. So we are going on to the Financial Times and looking for the financial crime. There is a letter on page 22 of the Financial Times that is worth diagnosing in the context of our diagnosing Fleet Street. And that letter is from a litigation finance company, and its heading is Litigation Funding Aims to Provide Justice for the Impecunious. Impecunious is meaning those who haven't got enough money. Now let's see the top of that. Now this is a complete and utter lie. No litigation company will fund real litigation. And let's see what this criminal letter claims. Now, there is a completely stupid kind of piece, this one. It admits, it confesses that The reality is litigation costs money, and it therefore favors those with lots of money. Claimants are often denied the opportunity to access justice because they are impecunious and no one will financially support them. Now, that is absolutely stupid. That does happen, but that is not the reality of most of the experience of the many who are justified in expecting the court system to offer them access, but are denied access by the court system, which is corrupt and built, organized, and manipulated in a way that prevents access, despite the fact that individual litigants may not need any funding or any funded licensed law trader, because they, the individual litigants, can argue and promote their own cases themselves. Despite the fact that there are so many in the many who can do that, they are not allowed to do that by the court's bureaucracies. And this criminal letter is completely in denial of that. And that is the nub, that is the center of the corruption. There is a policy option given to the court's bureaucracy and the criminals who are members of the staff in the various courts offices. Essentially, their agenda and their kind of policy that they operate is to stop litigants getting effective access to litigation through the courts. That's what they're in place to do, and that's what they do. And the English judicial system is in breach. The English judicial system is in breach of most of the obligations about access to justice, obligations that are enshrined in those treaties that I keep mentioning, not enshrined in the internal English British kind of legislation and statutes. Because English and British statutes are corruptly made, as I've mentioned with the Formula One, connection with the Barney Ecclestone donation of £1 million to the Tony Blair fronted Labour Party, and the particular piece of legislation that followed soon. The obligation to allow litigants access to the court system, that obligation is imposed by the various conventions and statutes, international statutes and kind of agreements and declarations. Not by the English domestic legislation. Now, that has to be explained in the context of the derogation, the option to derogate from the international treaties and obligations and declarations and conventions. But the derogation option is only available if not to derogate, to allow the international kind of text of the particular agreement or declaration or statute to be made available to the litigant, if to do that would endanger national security. But that's not the case. It is not the case in 1 in a million of the litigation cases. And yet, most of the applications for individual litigation are rejected by the court staff lying and abusing and violating those enshrined rights to litigation, enshrined in the international codes and international treaties and conventions, obligations, and agreements and charters and declarations. So this letter in the Financial Times is absolute lies. Now, we have talked about that letter, and we shall talk more about the litigation and the corrupt behavior of the English courts at every level. Now, this is a piece on page 2 of the Financial Times of Tuesday, the 25th of May, 2021. It is based on a National Crime Agency inquiry, says Bank of England chief. Now, this is based on a hearing in the House of Commons yesterday. And it starts the investigation into Violence, the retail bank owned by metals entrepreneur Sanjeev Gupta, in both the National Crime Agency as well as the Serious Fraud Office, the governor of the Bank of England revealed yesterday. Gupta, owner of Liberty Steel, is fighting to keep the GFG Alliance business empire afloat after the collapse of Greensill Capital, the supply chain finance company that fueled his acquisition spree. The Serious Fraud Office announced 2 weeks ago it had launched an investigation into suspected fraud and money laundering at Gupta's GPG. Andrew Bailey, Bank of England governor, said the Serious Fraud Office started examining Violence, the private bank owned by Gupta, after a concern surfaced at the end of 2018. The Prudential Regulation Authority started investigating concerns around connected lending in the context of the ultimate beneficial owner, who is Sanjeev Gupta. Bailey told the Commons Treasury Committee, Bailey has told that to the Treasury Committee yesterday. As a result of that initial work, the Prudential Regulation Authority in September 2019 imposed curbs on Gupta's Violence to prevent further lending transactions with certain parties, while placing limits on the bank's ability to accept deposits. Those restrictions were subsequently tightened on 5 occasions in the following 18 months, the governor said. Bailey said further concerns came to light about Violence in October or November 2019, leading to a new phase of investigations which the National Crime Agency notified of the concerns. After various investigations, some were overt, some were not, the FRA set out its concerns to the Serious Fraud Office. Violence announced earlier this month it was to be sold were wound up after its accounts revealed repayments on 80% of its loan book were overdue. The Bank of England ordered the bank to repay customer deposits in March. And it goes on. Sanjeev Gupta is a crook. And the crook was allowed literally hundreds of millions of pounds, to kind of abuse and exploit. And he was allowed millions and millions and millions of pounds of debt. Think about that. A crook is being allowed millions of pounds of debt. Yes. And he's not paying them and he's not being prosecuted. And they're fiddling about by probing and probing and probing. They're not prosecuting him. Would they do that to a low paid benefit claimant? Think about the contrast. Think volumes. Think billions of pounds being denied to the poor and the lowest income people in Britain. And there is a long piece, only on a single column, but it is a long piece, and I shall go to that one. It's related as to how the big criminals are allowed to loot the economy while the many are starved. Thousands of them were starved to death under the regime, the corrupt regime of Ian Darty, Dracula Duncan Smith at the Department for Deprivation, Poverty and Want, DWP, while George Gideon Osborne was in post as David Cameron's Chancellor. And as Chancellor, Gideon Osborne claimed glory in making the lives of the poorest the most miserable. And it was those years during which Keir Starmer, the so-called Labour leader now, was in post as the Director of Public Prosecutions, in which capacity Starmer was very hostile to the lowest income, poorest people. There was no prosecution. There was absolutely no prosecution of the criminals by the criminal Keir Starmer. And there is not likely to be any prosecution of Gupta or Greensill or Cameron or any of their hundreds of, if you like, colluders, agents, employees, spies, contractors. So the Financial Crimes is a criminal publication by hiding all these truth, what I'm talking about. And this letter is stupid. Now, this letter that is headed Rousseau's Civil Society Requires Redefining. Now, this writer is given the name of Olivia Lunn. It reads like a woman's name, and the location is Southwest 1 in London, UK. And I'll come to that a bit more later. There is a piece by a black woman who is pictured there as Tyler Nicole Rogers. And her piece is headed Economic Reform Crucial to Improve the Lives of Black Americans. And this is a piece about apparent commitment by the Joe Biden administration to include the Black community in the program for recovery. But there's a spin that is timed coincidentally to coincide with the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. Now, going back to this letter by this woman, Olivia Lunn, it says Camilla Hodgson and Billy Newman rightly point to the need to ascribe commercial value to nature's assets. Green-minded investors should be encouraged to actively invest in a greener future rather than passively divesting from a polluted one. While the market must empower the natural environment, legislators need to chair the discussion. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, the first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society. Now, obviously, that is stupid. It is time, this Olivia Lunn says, to redefine our conception of civil society. We must recognize nature as the true founder. While no nation has a positive principle that gives consent to the exploitation of the commons, the absence of a legal mechanism through which to solve disputes that occur in areas outside of conservation zones to species unprotected by law, by implication, permits harm. The UK constitutional principle that everything which is not forbidden is allowed, also known as the Lotus Principle, needs urgent revision. We need a global commons guardian created by legislators and supported by investors. Now, there she makes the mistake, because no legislators will go there. So she leaves out the many, the role of the people. And to quote Rousseau is itself stupid. Nobody mentions Rousseau in the discourse about society at all. Now we shall go back to this piece about pensions. Let's look at the pensions because it is about poverty. And it is about the lack of access to judicial intervention. Now, this is a headed workplace pension fees to be made clearer. That is in itself a typically financial crimes piece. Now, this piece about the DWP consultation, workplace pension fees, to be made clearer, is another typical criminal piece of obfuscation and stupidity by the financial crimes. What I'm saying is that reading that piece without full knowledge of the background and the context, most of the many would not understand anything about what is going on. And that's the problem. The newspapers don't tell the truth about what is going on, what the policies are, what the intentions are, because this piece quotes somebody called David Robbins, director Willis Towers Watson, the professional services firm, who is reportedly quoted as saying, the DWP does not explicitly say that it might force employers to divert contributions to a provider of the employee's choice. But this appears to be the subtext. So why didn't the financial crimes ask the DWP whether that was the case? Nothing stopped the financial crimes from asking the DWP to confirm this statement. So we go back to the Financial Times editorial about Lukashenko's air piracy. And it says boldly, Lukashenko's air piracy must be punished. It's not holding. It's actually openly saying that Lukashenko has behaved as a pirate and he needs to be punished. One kidnapped journalist, and Lukashenko needs to be punished by the rest of the powerful kind of opposition, that is the West. No such editorial has even been conceived or thought about in relation to the massacres of the Palestinians over decades. the violators and the murderers of Palestinians have never been called pirates, and never have they been condemned to be punished by the West. Think about that. This is supposed to be a paper that is supposed to be edited by a woman born in the Lebanon, Arab woman. This is the answer why they appointed her in the first place. She would echo the Crusaders' agenda and denial against the Arabs. So we shall be putting an end to this part B, at this stage, and we shall continue discussing, diagnosing the Fleet Street papers in the next part.